A year ago, an unknown company called Pebble put itself in the map after it managed to deliver on its crowdfunded campaign and released what was one of the very first modern and actually successful smartwatches. The company was overwhelmed by the demand, and that's as good an indicator as any to a big shot company that the age of wearables is finally drawing near. The response was super quick. Samsung announced its fancy looking Galaxy Gear smartwatch alongside its Galaxy Note 3 in September last year, and yet consumers were seemingly unmoved. Despite the parts that Samsung had actually gotten right, like a color display instead of a monochrome for one, it was undeniable that the Gear felt rushed and lacked the breadth of functional applications of the Pebble. It was also expensive and could only pair up with the Note 3 at launch. Today we'll be taking a look at the follow-up, the Gear 2, and try to assess whether Samsung learned from the whole experience. At $299, it still is one of the most expensive smartwatches out there, but a precursory look does indicate that Samsung has actually improved its wearable in several areas. So has the Gear 2 become a functional enough device as to rank high on your list next time you go smartwatch shopping? This is Chris with PhoneArena, let's find out. While the Gear 2 by no means introduces a plot twist with its design language compared with the original Galaxy Gear, quite a bit has changed and exclusively for the better. The face of the watch looks much sleeker now and is also unencumbered by the 4 screws that kept the original together. The power/home button has also been moved to the front and is now much larger and significantly easier to operate. As before, the viewable part of the face is all glass and metal and holds a 1.63-inch 320 by 320 pixel AMOLED display, which is both detailed enough and sufficiently bright for use even under direct sunlight. But the improvements in design didn't stop there. The camera, for example, no longer protrudes from the strap, and alongside the new IR blaster is now neatly nestled at the end of the physical body of the Gear 2, immediately before the strap. Speaking of the body and strap, those have both seen some slim sizing. The body itself is still plastic, but it's also thinner and IP67 dust and water resistant, while the strap comes with a much smaller and classier looking clasp. Moreover, you'll find a heart rate monitor embedded at the rear of the watch's body. Oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about in terms of interface. Ladies and gentlemen, say goodbye to Android, as the Gear 2 does not make use of Google's OS, as it's got a Tizen heart instead. In any case, virtually nothing about the Tizen-based software looks or functions differently from the Android-based one in the first generation of the Gear. That said, a lot has been added on top of the previous platform. But let's first talk about user experience using the Gear 2. Well, it's actually exceedingly simplistic in nature and in a good way. Unlike your non-smartwatch, for example, the display doesn't work all the time. By default, the display is set to wake up whenever it detects motion in an effort to try and guess movements reminiscent to when you raise your wrist to check the time as you would with a normal watch. Unfortunately, and at least in our opinion, it is too sensitive, so the display constantly powers on. This not only drains the battery unnecessarily, but can also be annoying and distracting. Looking at the home screen, it houses the time and date along with quick access to the camera, the pedometer and settings. Samsung provides you with a few choices here, and you can instead have the weather show up or even set up a fitness-centric home screen which constantly updates itself with the number of steps you've traveled. Navigating your Gear 2 is simple. You just swipe left and right to access different screens like you would on your smartphone. Whenever you need to quit an app or go back a step, you simply swipe from the top, and that's about it. The physical home button also works like its Android counterparts. A click will transport you directly to your chosen home screen unless you're inside an app, where it simply works like a back button. The UI has also been updated with the option to have a proper background image instead of just having a pick of several primary colors and a few secondaries. What's more, apps are now arranged in a 2x2 grid for each home screen, and you can rearrange them, which makes navigation that much easier. Alright, so let's talk functionality. The Messages app, as you can imagine, allows you to read the full text messages that you have received on your smartphone, and you can even reply using a number of preset templates with short answers, or even create your own. A dedicated email app synchronizes with the built-in Samsung mailbox on your device, allowing you to read the full contents of an email instead of just serving as a notification. You can again reply with preset answers, but nothing more. The notification app contains each and every stored notification. These are not just snippets though. All the information from the notification you received on your device is usually available right from your Gear 2. What's more, thanks to a feature called Smart Relay, you can easily transition between the tiny notification window on the Gear 2 directly to your full-size device exactly where you left off. You also get dialer and contact apps built in, and they both are well implemented for the small screen and work well. For example, the dialer will recognize the number you're typing if you have it stored on your smartphone, and you can also use the numeric keypad to search and dial names directly in T9-like fashion. As for the Contacts app, you can easily navigate through your many contacts thanks to the alphabetical slider on the right. The rest of the built-in apps include the likes of S-Voice for voice commands, a timer, a stopwatch, voice memos, and a weather app, all of which were also present on the original Gear. The new one here are the Schedule app, which works in unison with your Samsung device's built-in calendar, and the Watch On Remote, which uses the built-in Air Blaster to control your TV and set-top box. Also new is the Heart Rate app, which allows you to take measurements of your heartbeat. Unfortunately, for it to work properly, you need to have the Gear 2 hugging your wrist bone, but not too tight nor too loose. Even then, however, it usually takes over 10 seconds for an actual reading, and those can be quite erratic too. There's also a new exercise app, by the way, which essentially uses the pedometer and your profile stats like age, height, weight and gender to provide approximations of the distance and the speed at which you're moving, along with a calorie counter. But what about third-party apps for the Gear 2? Well, there are some like Evernote, Feedly, Banjo, along with several watch faces, but the list is really short and a big portion of it isn't free. What's more, maps or turn-by-turn navigation still remain a mirage. Thankfully, apps that work with the Galaxy Gear will work with the Gear 2 as well. However, the small app ecosystem size continues to be by far the biggest issue we have with Samsung smartwatches. So, we've talked a lot about how the Gear 2 works in unison with your Samsung device, but how does the actual pairing happen? Well, first and foremost, you cannot pair up with just any Android device. Instead, the smartwatch is only compatible with Samsung devices, though the list has now grown to 18 different models, including the Galaxy S4 and S5, and even the Note 2 and Note 3. The Gear 2 pairs up via Bluetooth 4.0, but is not as easy as pairing a Bluetooth headset, for example. It requires you to download the Gear Manager app on your phone or tablet of the Samsung App Store and go through a few prompts. The rest is, for all intents and purposes, a completely automated process, but a bit time-consuming. The Gear 2 also ups the ante in the performance department with a speedier dual-core Samsung Exynos 3250 chip clocked at 1 GHz along with 512 MB of RAM. This is a sizable upgrade from the single-core processor on the original Galaxy Gear, which allows the Gear 2 to push through the fancier graphics and new interface at even faster speeds than its predecessor. Essentially, you're getting slightly better response times with the added benefit of all the extra functionality. We have experienced no scenarios where lag or hang-ups rear their ugly heads above the surface, and that's definitely a big plus for the Gear 2. In typical Samsung fashion, no part of the package is left untouched, and this extends to the camera too. The upgraded 2-megapixel autofocus shooter can take 1920 by 1080p snaps and shoot video in 720p. Yet, despite its undeniable spy appeal, the camera is hardly the work of a miracle. That said, it's adequate considering it's strapped onto a smartwatch of all things, but really nothing beyond that. As for video, 720p is the name of the game, though keep in mind that there is a 15 seconds cap of footage likely to conserve space. The quality is once again poor by today's smartphone standards, but you can actually produce very workable clips when light is abundant. For all intents and purposes, there are exactly 3 multimedia apps to be found on the Gear 2. A gallery app and a music player, plus a separate media controller. Starting from the top, the gallery is as simple as it gets. You basically get to scroll through all your photos and videos 4 at a time, and the feature set is pretty basic. You can delete and share or set the image as a background for the watch, but nothing beyond that. The music player is a tad fancier and reminds us a lot of the built-in solutions that usually come with smartphones. It's still bare, but all the essentials are there: navigation and volume controls, and even a miniaturized and navigable playlist. In any case, it lets you play music that you have loaded on the Gear 2 via your computer. That said, keep in mind that you cannot connect a pair of headphones directly to the smartwatch, so you're actually left with the onboard loudspeaker. The media controller app, however, is way more reasonable. It allows you to easily control the volume or switch the tracks currently playing on your paired Samsung device without having to take it out of your pocket. You can dial contacts and even hold a call through the Gear 2, though it obviously still needs its trusty Samsung device sidekick to do the actual placing of the call. The Gear 2 is just used as the loudspeaker and the microphone. If you do decide to take calls this way, prepare yourself for disappointment. The speaker does alright, though it's still very weak, so noisy areas actually render this option unfeasible. The tiny microphone, on the other hand, is what really disappointed us. Put into words, just imagine that you are within a giant steel tube inside a giant bathroom, because that's the way the other side will hear you. There is echo, there's distortion, there are bassy and growly voices, and zero of your voice's actual tonality. A 300 mAh cell is what powers the Gear 2, but don't sell it short just yet. Depending on your usage habits, it's actually capable of holding its ground for up to 4 or 5 days. If you like playing with your smartwatch, however, the very maximum you should expect is 3 days. When the battery is out, you can juice it up through a pocketable charging dock that Samsung provides, which snaps onto the back of the watch and connects to a power source via micro USB. Samsung has carried out a number of improvements with the Gear 2 and pretty much all of them were for the better. We definitely like the design more, as the watch is both less bulky and lighter, but also less sporty with its looks. With the exception of the orange colored version, you can easily slap the Gear 2 even for a fancier occasion, though you still want a classic timepiece for the rare gala. Samsung has also bumped up the specs of a few internals, and the watch generally performs very well in terms of responsiveness and speed. But like with its predecessor, the Gear 2's Achilles heel is its poor app ecosystem and its incompatibility with devices other than Samsung's very own. This situation is even more inadmissible some 6 months later. The other major source of displeasure is the price tag on the Gear 2. At $299, this thing ain't cheap. Competitors like the far more functional but arguably less cool Pebble Steel sell for $229, while the original costs just $150. Even Sony's new smartwatch 2 costs only $145 on Amazon right now. In the end, we found that the type of functionality that we could see ourselves rely on daily is virtually non-existent. The Gear 2 is an extension of your smartphone at the very best. At worst, it's nothing more than a watch for techies, and an expensive one at that.